Welcome everyone to another exciting episode of what I believe and my co-host believes is the number one aquarium podcast on the internet, the Tank Talk Podcast. I am your host, John Hudson, along with the other host, the co-host. I don't like calling you a co-host. That just sounds weird. The other host of this number one podcast, Jason Adams, the professor from Primetime Aquatics. Jason, we've got a fun topic today. Maybe a little bit more fun for me, but you'll definitely have plenty of input in it too.
Absolutely. What are we going to be talking about today again?
We're going to be talking about ponds.
Ponds.
We probably should have talked about this maybe a month or so ago when pond season was kind of starting to kick off, at least in my area. We started pond season last month, but in your area it might be just happening now, so
Yep.
It'd probably be a good time to put this up. But I'm very excited about it. I have the bug for sure, and I have plans, lots of plans for ponds. But want to talk about all the different types of ponds that are out there, the different options, a good place to start and where we all end up wishing we could be. But before we get into that, I do want to address real quick a couple of things. Number one, if you are watching this on YouTube, you're noticing a difference right now. You noticed it last week too. I am in my office today with my bobbleheads and my chihuahuas, who will hopefully not make very much noise today. And I'm here because I simply could not figure out how to get the internet going in the fish house today. I struggled with it. I ran back and forth trying to get it going, and I couldn't get it up and running. So we're here in the office today, and it's going to be fine. And for those of you that are listening, you're not going to care either way. So just wanted to make everybody aware the next few episodes, this is what it's going to look like. I wish I could put something on my TV there run some kind of a slideshow or something to at least have something back there, but hey, we work with what we've got. The next thing to address is the fact that I was not able to make it to Aquashella kind of shut down our plans for the podcast, all the plans that we had. It's my fault. I ruined that. But we do, Jason and I still fully intend on fulfilling those promises that were made. It's just going to be on a later date. In fact, we've talked about, not Jason and I, but Lisa and I, my wife Lisa and I have talked about traveling down to Florida to be at Rick Biro's farm and do a podcast with him there, along with a couple of videos and stuff like that for the KG Tropicals YouTube channel. So that's kind of in the works now, but I think Rick is getting a little anxious. He's like, hey, y'all better get down here before it gets too hot because it's brutal down here in the summertime. I don't know. It might be one of those things where we don't get down there until Aquashella Daytona. I don't know. That's November. We'll have to see. But the plans that we had for the special guests that will be on the podcast, those plans are still intact. We just had to change those plans, but we still plan on bringing all of those people to you eventually. Might have to be done remotely or, in person at the next event. Who knows? So there we go. There's all of the updates. Sorry about that, but Lisa and I are a two-person operation, and being able to make it out there to Aquashella in Dallas was just too much. So. You got anything you want to say before I get going on the whole pond topic?
So,
well, that's good.
No, that was enlightening, right? No, let's go ahead. Let's talk about some ponds. You mentioned you have already been in pond season in our area. Yeah, right about now, end of May, it becomes a little bit safer to start putting fish outside, but you still need a heater. Right now, it's not even 70 degrees. It's probably going to reach a high of 71, 72 today. In the nighttime hours, it's still getting down into the 50s and 60s in the Chicagoland area. At least recently it has. So it's entering that time, but you have to have a heater in our area for a lot of fish.
Yeah, for us, it's never not pond season, but the koi and the goldfish, they do still overwinter themselves. I guess you could. I don't really want to call it hibernation because I don't think they really hibernate here, but The temperatures don't get drastically cold here like they do in your area, but the fish do still kind of hang out in the bottom. They don't eat. They just kind of rest for the winter time here. But it's, you know, it looks normal. Everything looks fine during the winter. The plants are all gone, and there's none of that. But so it's almost like I get to enjoy it all year long. But when somebody comes over to see it in the wintertime here, they're like, "What's wrong with the fish? They're not very active, are they?" Well, they're doing what they do in the wintertime. But I want to start from kind of the beginning of ponds. I mean, I could sit here and talk, not the beginning of the history of ponds, but the way it all starts for all of us. I could spend the entire hour talking about my pond that I got put into my yard last year. Documented the whole thing on the KG Tropicals YouTube channel if you want to check that out. It was the realization of a lifelong dream for me. I've said that so many times on this podcast about different things, but it's true. It's something I've wanted forever and just never had the opportunity to do it. But I got that dream realized last year. But a lot of people, including me and your wife, we start out small. When you think about a pond, I think we all dream of the big rock formations and the multiple waterfalls and the water features and the big, huge pond with 3-foot long koi fish in there that are 30 years old. We all dream of that. But most of us, I know certainly me, don't have the money to do something like that, because that is, you could buy a house for what a pond like that would cost, a real nice house too. So we got to start on a more realistic level. And Lisa and I, the very first pond we ever had was nothing fancier than a 110-gallon stock tank made by Rubbermaid that we bought at Tractor Supply. And I think you have something similar to that, or you used to anyway.
I did. We do. So we actually started even smaller than that, and I don't remember where it came from. It was like Home Depot or Lowe's. Joanna brought home one time this 50-gallon Rubbermaid type thing, but it had different levels. And so her intent was, well, to make me dig a hole in the ground and bury this thing in the ground, which is what you do. So I put this thing in the ground. And yeah, we started with a 50-gallon, basically plastic pond, and it worked great. I mean, it held water just fine. It was made well. I think we threw an air stone in there, and I think we had a small pond pump that we put in there. It was more than enough, but our intention with that, as it is with many people who are just beginning, was to put small fish in that pond and just breed them over the summer. So you've got that kind of thing, or, I'm sure you'll talk about like just the summer tubbing sort of situation where you're just putting fish in a plastic tote outside and see what happens in the fall. And our first go at that was basically, I believe we put some guppies and some white clouds in that 50-gallon tote, and we pulled out a lot more fish in the end. So that was, and she had fun because Joanna had fun with all the plants, the semi-aquatic plants, something that we can't necessarily always do in our fish tanks and in our fish room, but it gave her the opportunity to do that outside. And of course, you decorate around the pond and you've got more plants there. So it was a lot of fun, and we had it up and running for, I think it was 2 years before we took it down.
Those really are a lot of fun. And the thing is, you can make them look really, really nice. I've seen a lot of bad ones too, but I've seen a lot. I used to travel to 10 houses a day doing my job back in the day, and I would see ponds all the time, from the small ones that you can literally take one trip to Lowe's and buy everything. You can get the pump and the liner, which is a pre-molded. It's probably what you're talking about, like a 50-gallon pre-molded thing that you just put down in the ground, put rocks around it, and boom, there you go. You can do that very inexpensively. You're not going to be putting koi in ponds like that, and I think koi are so common in ponds that most people call them koi ponds. They don't even call them ponds. They're just, hey, I want to put a koi pond in my yard. It's almost like the Kleenex of facial tissues. I mean, everybody calls them koi ponds. You're going to want something much more substantial than that. Even mine, my pond is 1,500 gallons, and people criticize me for having koi in there. I mean, these are big fish. You want them to be, in something as big as possible. But I think those little systems are great. We've never had one. We've always done the above ground, basically summer tubbing is what we've done, and still do to this day. We have a tub on our porch that stays out there year round. It's on the porch of the fish house. Lisa breeds ram's horn snails in there year round. And we had an interesting story. There was 5 feeder goldfish that were in there that she went to the store with my grandson and bought. And it was the first thing that her and him did together. Her first grandchild. They did that, just the two of them, and he picked out 5 feeder goldfish, and we put them in that tub. That one's 150 gallon. And they were in there for several years until we moved them into Lisa's newest tank, the 4x4x2 cube that she has. We did a video all about that, and it's a very special thing. Those fish mean a lot to her. But that tub, the thing with summer tubbing is it's not very attractive. It's fun because depending on your climate, you can, certain months out of the year, you can put your rice fish and your guppies and your white clouds and things like that in there and breed them. And it's really, really neat. But at the end of the day, it's a stock tank, which is meant to feed cattle sitting on your yard. It's not the most attractive thing in the world. However, it is a really good way to get started, or one of those molded ones. The one thing I would suggest, yes, it is true. I am a Seache fanboy. I make no apologies for it. I think they make some of the best products on the planet. There is a product that I am in love with that is kind of an all-in-one thing that anybody that wants to set up an inexpensive, I shouldn't say inexpensive because I don't know how much this thing costs, but it is an all-in-one pond filter. And I'm going to be honest with you. I don't even know the name of this thing, but I will look it up and I will put it in the description on YouTube and the show notes of the audio podcast, a link to this product. But it's an all-in-one, basically a box that you can set down into the water, and it has a tube that comes up with several different fountainhead styles on it. You plug this thing in and you're done. You have all you need to filter the aquarium. Now, you can get away with just an air stone or something like that, like you did, but if you want to take that to the next level, this is a great way to go from a hole in the ground to actually a functioning, attractive looking pond filter. And all you do is take it out of the box, put it down in, and turn it on, and it's done. It's a really, really good way of doing it. In fact, I may mention that pump again when I talk about future plans, because it is kind of a foolproof way of doing this. And if you're in one of those climates like mine, where I live in the coastal plains of North Carolina, it gets cold in the winter here, but not snowing. It doesn't snow. If it snows here, it's like the apocalypse. Nobody knows what to do. It's so rare that people freak out, a dusting, and they cancel schools for a year or a week. So that's how rare snow is here. But it does get cold enough, and there's about 2 weeks out of the year where if you have a pond, maybe it may get a thin film of ice on top of the pond. Well, having that water movement will break that up so that whatever you have in there, if you're able to overwinter them, they won't die. Because, if it ices over, seals everything off, you will suffocate your fish that are down in there. So having that water moving is going to be something that's, it's going to keep your fish alive through the winter if you're in a situation like this. Now, if you're in the Chicagoland area and you're basically in the depths of winter for 6 months out of the year, you probably going to have a different process for what you do. But I know here, we can get away with having just that. And the water might get a little ice on it, but it doesn't freeze over, and that's good. So that is a really good product, and shame on me for not looking it up to know the name of that product. But it's fantastic. And if you're trying to set up that first pond and you're trying to do it on the cheap, it's a great way to do it. I've seen them before. They're on YouTube now. I've seen them in person where you have the person who wants to do the DIY pond and they just basically dig a hole and then buy a cheap liner off of the devil. I call Amazon the devil, Jason, sorry. And put that liner down in there, put a few rocks around it, and now you have a pond. There's so many of those out there, and some people make them look really good, and good for them. It's awesome. It's a fun weekend DIY project. Um, I don't know if you've ever. Well, that's kind of like what you did, except you used the molded pond, right?
Right. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it wasn't a very big hole because it wasn't a very deep pond. It wasn't very large. It may have been, oh, I don't know, maybe 4 feet long, but only a couple feet wide, and I don't know how many feet deep. Like I said, it almost had like a stair kind of
Right.
level to it, where it was like a step down, and it was a great way just to, if you want water outside and you want something to look at outside that's not going to cost a fortune, that's going to be an easy 1 day setup. That's a great way to go. Obviously, as you've already mentioned, you're very limited then in terms of the types of fish that you would keep, because it's a 50-gallon pond. And if you were to think in terms of a 55-gallon aquarium, okay, well, what kinds of fish can you keep out there long term? Especially if you want to see some breeding, you're dealing with smaller community fish for the most part. We had special considerations as well because you mentioned temperature. Here, the pond season isn't very long. Like I said, maybe you're putting fish in May, definitely with a heater in our area, and but by September you're thinking, okay, these things are going to have to come out, otherwise it's going to get too cold. Even with a heater, that heater's really going to struggle if it has to. In our area, in the Chicagoland area, anytime from basically November through March, it's going to be on almost constantly, and especially in those times when you've got a lot of snow, or you've got, oh, it's -10 today, the heater's not keeping up. You're just going to burn that heater out. And so in our area with a pond that size, it necessitates pond season's over, September, get the fish out, bring them inside, and then you can start over again next year.
The only thing that goes against what you're talking about is if the pond is big enough. I mean, you
And
and
deep
I,
enough. Yeah, if it's
right,
deep enough, then for sure. I mean, you're not pulling giant 30-inch koi out of a huge pond that's deep.
right. You and
Yeah.
I talked about it, and we're going to talk about it in great depth. Quite possibly the finest man-made pond on the planet that is in right down the street from your house. Well, I don't know if it's right down the street. I don't know that area,
It's
but I
not far,
know,
about 30 minutes.
yeah, 30 minutes down the road from where you live. We'll talk about that eventually because it's the finest one that's ever been done, and it has a connection to my pond in the backyard. But yeah, I mean, if the body of water is big enough and the fish are the right fish, even in your climate, they can stay out there. But obviously, you know, we're talking about ponds that are, 4, 5, 6 feet deep. Um, and I don't know. I know there's a certain rule which I don't have to follow because I live in a warmer climate. But I know there's a certain rule, like below the frost line or something, you need to be to be able to overwinter certain fish. You're not going to do that with guppies and maybe rice fish you could, and white clouds, rice fish, and goldfish. That's pretty much all I know that you can overwinter even in the climate that you're in. If the conditions are right, which would mean that the water's deep enough. Water's still going to be super cold, but it's not going to be a solid block of ice for 3 months out of the year. Fish
Right.
will not thaw and start swimming around in the springtime. It's not going to happen.
No.
But there's a certain thing, and I don't know. This is something I've seen a lot, and I absolutely love, and it's very similar to what you're talking about. You had, and I didn't get a chance to see yours when I was there. I don't know why, but we just never went back there and saw it. We were right there
Yeah.
at your back door, but we never went out there to see it. I would see this a lot in people's houses, visiting their houses to fix furniture. The tiny little water feature that's at their front door, like, in their planter bed, that some of them don't even have fish in it, but you get that water trickling, and it's a beautiful thing. I love seeing that kind of thing. Lisa and I have talked about doing something like that at the front of our house. I love that. I think when you introduce water, even if there's no fish, just one of those fishless water features, I guess is what you would call it, rather than calling it a pond. I think those are amazing. It doesn't do much for people that really want to have fish in them, but just the whole concept of just a water feature to me is just something that just makes me happy. I mean, it has been a life-changing thing having my pond. It's also been a source of huge frustration, which we'll get into. But it's such an amazing thing. I walk past it 25 times a day, and every single time I can't help myself. I have to stop and just stare at it for a little bit. It's an amazing thing. But you got to start somewhere, and starting with those small kits or the pre-molded things, I think that's a great way to start and get your feet wet if you want to talk about it or you want to describe it that way. But the next step up I think would be something along the lines of what I've done, which is the full hole dug pond liner, multiple levels, heavily rocked, full blown not aquarium, fish pond. I don't want to call it a koi pond, even though mine is, because there's a lot of different kinds of fish that you can put into them. This is where things get to be serious money, and this is why it took me so long to be able to do it. Contrary to what a lot of people may think, because we have the YouTube channel and we know Greg personally and we documented it on YouTube. A lot of people think we got our pond for free. We did not. We had to pay for a lot of the stuff. Full disclosure, Greg did sponsor the kit for us, which is a huge expense. But Lisa and I still had to pay for all of the excavation, the rocks, all of the rocks, not just the big ones. So it was still a large expense for me. But the contractor that did our pond, this is going to be alarming to a lot of people. And it's going to be a sticker shock situation. And it was for me. My pond would run in the neighborhood of about $25,000. That is no fish. That's just the water feature out there. Is it worth it? Oh, yes. It's been a life-changing thing for me. I absolutely love it. The peace, you want to call it zen, whatever you want to call it, just going out there. Right now is when the bugs are coming, so it's going to be hard to really enjoy it. But what we have to do now is go out there at night, turn the lights on. We got lights put in the pond. Turn the lights on, and we can sit out on the porch and enjoy it at night without all the bugs. And it's a beautiful thing. But it's a dream. But you can buy a very nice brand new automobile for what that costs. And I've got a friend who's well known on YouTube. I'm not going to say his name though, because I don't want to put his personal information out there. But he's got a spectacular pond in his backyard that he bought as a retirement present for himself. And he lives in his lot where he lives has a very steep slope that when he walks out his back door, it goes up. So you walk out of his back door and you're looking up a hill. And he had this pond built where it starts at the top and comes all the way down the hill. And I'm not talking about a hill the size of Everest. I'm talking about something like 40 feet long that has a rise of maybe 4 feet. Not a steep mountain, but just a mound in his backyard. Starts at the top, it goes down several levels until it gets to the large pond that's right outside of his house. He paid over $40,000 for his. So we're talking about big money when you're going with those full, professionally built kits, which mine definitely was. I was out there watching the guys, but there was no way I could have built something like this myself. The rocks alone are hundreds and hundreds of pounds a piece, and you're having to move them around, and they had to use heavy equipment to do that and stuff like that. They did the whole thing in 2 days, but they had the excavator and the big front end loader and all of these big pieces of machinery and the skills to know how to run the strap around the rock so that they can move it and stuff like that. This is why it cost as much as it did. Um, and the rocks alone for my pond were almost $5,000. So, that shows you're getting into big money. So this does make the concept of the DIY pond, just digging a hole and building it yourself, much more appealing. And you don't have to spend those thousands of dollars, or in some cases tens of thousands of dollars, to get the experience. If I was going to build one on my own, which I've actually thought about doing because I've got the bug now, like I'm a pond guy now. Like I am a pond guy. And it's because of the impact that this one's had. I want more of them, but I ain't got the money to be paying 25 grand a pop. So the DIY ones are definitely doable. I'd like to ask you though, Jason. I know that your property probably would not allow you to do something huge, but let's say you lived on a property like mine. Like, what would the ideal pond for you be? I've never asked you this before, but I know you want one because you're a fish keeper.
You really want this answer?
I do.
Well, I might have a pond. But see, my attraction to fish is watching them from a fish tank perspective, right? So like the gallery that you see behind me, that's my main thing. When we had the pond for 2 seasons, and then we took it away, we took it down, we filled in the ground. And one of the reasons for that was, we'd go out there, and again, part of it was, it's not a huge pond, right? It's a little tiny thing. It was on right next to our patio, but you weren't really seeing a whole lot of fish there. And when you did, it's like, all right, I can see the tops of them, but I want to see the ecosystem. And so I'm a little different in that I like to look in the aquarium and see the ecosystem and see the fish interacting in there. And for me, a pond is a little bit limiting. You can't necessarily see that. You can build an ecosystem, but you can't see it the way you can see an aquarium. So my ideal pond would probably be something where, kind of like what you're describing with that wall, so you have like a waterfall, you have a lot of lights, you have a lot of plants, and yes, there would be fish in there, but I would probably not put goldfish or koi in there. I would do something silly. I'd probably put African cichlids in there, or tinfoil barbs, or bala sharks. These larger I might even do Oscars. I mean, it'd have to be a large pond, but if I'm going to do a 2,000 or 3,000 gallon pond, let's say, with waterfalls and all that stuff, I want some like crazy awesome fish in there. What I really enjoy is probably the thing that most people wouldn't. My idea would be of having ponds, if you will, would be just like those big IBC totes. Because for me, what would be exciting is, and I went down, and when I saw Grant and Shelby Garden of Eden, they have a place in Florida, and when I went into their backyard, they actually had all the things. They had a pool that had fish in there, so kind of like the Big Rich Ohio Fish Rescue thing, except it was outside. Then they had a greenhouse, and there were bins in there, but then their yard was lined with these large IBC totes, and they were breeding shrimp. To me, that's where things get exciting, because whatever outdoor water I have, I'd want to just breed as much as I possibly could. That would be exciting for me. And I visited a number of places down there when I was down there a couple of years ago, where people had fish tanks outside. They had the IBC totes. They had all these things, large like cement vats, but they were above ground. But due to them being in Florida, they were fine all year round. In fact, the biggest thing was making sure there was shade in the summertime so that the water wouldn't, get 92, 93 degrees. So that would be my ideal situation, is if I'm going to do an in-ground pond, it would just be about water features. It would be about the lights. It would be about the plants surrounding the thing, and then putting in some crazy aquarium fish that usually, we did a podcast. If you haven't seen it, check it out. Maybe it was like 6 weeks ago or so, where we talked about fish that shouldn't be in the hobby, because we very rarely have aquariums large enough for them. Those would be the fish that would wind up in my pond. Probably wouldn't see them very often, but that's okay, because it would be more about, just like you said, the visual Zen thing of looking at the water feature, not so much the fish that are in the pond. Heck, I might put a snapping turtle in there, and I mean a big one. So, you move into a place and 30 years later, like, oh, there's old Red. What's Red? He's my snapping turtle. I got him when he was a dime, and now he's big. Don't put your feet in there. They'll go missing, Because when we had the small one of the things that happened the second year, we were trying to breed bristlenose and maybe it was rice fish. Well, frogs got in there. So we wound up with some bristlenose fry. I think we about had maybe as many rice fish as we put in there, but they weren't the same ones. And the frogs just were like, "Thanks for the home there, buddy." So that was an issue where if I had the IBC toast, the tubs, I would just cover them, breed as much as I could, and hopefully put in a half a dozen fish, and you're pulling out hundreds every month.
Mm. Well, and I feel it necessary to clarify something because I said something that sounded really, really bad, and I apologize for that. Folks, Jason and Joanna live in an absolutely amazing place. Uh, the way I talked about it was like, oh, you can't do one where you're at. What I'm talking about is you live in a townhouse type
Right.
situation where the backyard is not conducive to a big, 30 by 16 pond or something like that. His house is probably worth triple what my house is worth. So,
No, 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 no,
oh,
no.
yes, it is. But so I wasn't trying to act like, oh, but what if you had a fancy place like mine? No, I just,
No, but you're right. You need the backyard space. You got to have
right.
that. And I'll tell you, if I did have the space that you have, and this hopefully someday our plan is to move south, probably closer to where you guys are at in Tennessee, would be like the ideal situation is to have more than one pond, like you're kind of talking about, put another one, build it yourself, have a walking path through there, and add the
Hmm.
trees, the plants, because the shade, I'm assuming, is especially in your area, becomes more important to make sure the water doesn't get crazy hot. So trees and multiple ponds, maybe three or four. I don't know how big they would be because now that you're telling me the cost, which I've never contemplated before, I'm
It's
like, well,
outrageous.
maybe three or four ponds, but it looks like I've got some back-breaking work to do because I don't want to invest another house in my backyard.
Yeah, I mean they are outrageous, but again, that's to go with the big fancy, big boulders and fancy waterfalls and stuff like that. You don't have to go that far. In fact, I've got a great example. The fish that I have in my pond were rescued from a obviously DIY pond that somebody put together that was I mean, it was hard to tell because everything was so overgrown around it, and it was actually magnificent the way it was overgrown. But you could tell that this was something that the people previous really did care about, and they spent a lot of time. However, when they sold their house, they just walked away from it, and and it was abandoned. But the pond was probably 12 feet by 12 feet square, perfect square, and it looked like they had dug a hole and then put like railroad ties around it, like 12 by 12s, and then ran their liner up above, over the railroad ties. So it was mostly below ground, but then there was also maybe a foot and a half of water that was above ground that was being held in by those railroad ties with growth all the way around it. And the interesting thing is the way the plants were, you couldn't even really tell that it was a square pond because that's one of the complaints that I would have. It's like if it's a square pond, that doesn't really look like something that would be like a natural water feature. I want it to look like something that nature made, not that a man made. But with all of the growth around it, it kind of hid that a little bit. And you could put some plants inside of it that would help with that too. But this was a situation where these people did this kind of on the cheap, and it would have been fine except for the fact that they abandoned it, shut the filters off, just let it overgrow. And when we walked into the backyard, the gentleman that built my pond actually is the one that brought me to this place. Because the new owners of the home were young people that were not interested. They were just like, hey, fish are cool, but we don't want to have anything to do with this. We want to tear the whole thing down. When we walked into the backyard, it just looked like this area that the landscaping had kind of gotten out of control. You couldn't even really tell that there was a pond in there until you go in there and move the plants to the side, and then you can see down in it. Um, it was a very inexpensive DIY pond that I have no idea how much it cost them, but it couldn't have been more than a couple $1,000s to put something like this together with a large liner. They had a nice, good 45 mil liner in there, like it was a good liner. And they did have some type of filtration that had a waterfall, but it wasn't running. So the water was quite literally black. When we walked up to it, you couldn't tell that there were fish even in there. There was a bag of Tetra koi food sitting there on the ground that the new homeowner had bought to feed the fish. We threw some of the pellets in there, and then the fish came up to eat it. That's the only way you could tell that there was fish in there. You want to talk about frogs? There were frogs everywhere, minnows everywhere. It was out of control. And that's one of the downsides of ponds. You know, it doesn't take that long for them to get to there where it's just a big, soupy, nasty mess. And the worst part about it is you're torturing fish when you do that. But the point is, this looked like it was something really nice at some point. And it was something that the people really took a lot of pride in putting it together and keeping it up until they didn't anymore. They left and they just let it do its thing, and that was unfortunate. But we saved 29 fish out of there. 4 grown koi, like 2 feet at least, because our pond was a partnership between Aquascape Inc., who is Greg Whitstock, our friend, and Easton Outdoors, who's the contractor that put it there. I named the 4 koi after 4 people that work at those 2 different places. So it was Greg, Ed, Micah, and Jim are my 4 koi. Unfortunately, we did lose one of those, and I'm sorry, Ed Ballou, one of my favorite people on the planet, an absolute pond genius. Ed, it was your fish that passed, which was heartbreaking. But we can talk about that later. I think the damage was done to that fish before we ever even got it, and it just didn't make it. But anyway, I guess this is my long-winded way of saying you can make something look really, really nice and not have to spend the tens of thousands of dollars. A couple $1,000s is still a lot of money for somebody to commit to a water feature in their yard, but you can make something look really, really nice and you know, stay within that area. My old neighbor, when I lived in King George, he was one of those guys that for him to be inside of his house, you're like, what's wrong? What's wrong with him? His name was Dara, and you would always see him outside. And he had a yard that I like to describe as a Mr. Miyagi backyard. Of course, you remember Mr. Miyagi's backyard from the original Karate Kid. His backyard looked like that. It was just, there was just beautiful plants and trees and shrubs and everything all over the place. And he had a pond in there that he put together for next to nothing. And it was gorgeous. So when I'm talking about these big numbers, $25,000 for a pond, it doesn't have to cost that much. You can put something together very, very nice. But most people are not like you, Jason. Most people, when they want to put together a pond, they want to do it specifically for koi. And you got to go big for koi. I've seen a lot of koi in little 50-gallon pre-molded ponds, like from Lowe's, like you're talking about. And that's just not, that's putting an Oscar in a 10-gallon tank. It's the equivalent of that. You absolutely want to stay away from that. I don't really know what the rule is for koi, but like I said, my pond is 1,500 gallons, and people gripe in my comment section that it's not big enough for koi. So you do want to go big. So if you're trying to do it on a budget, you might not be going the koi route because you might not be able to go that big. However, goldfish, they're not as gorgeous as koi, but they are amazing fish. You can get them with a bunch of different colors, and you can buy them for 10 cents a piece. Buy feeder fish, put them in there, and they will absolutely blow your mind. And something you alluded to, not being able to see them, this is going to sound like I'm some kind of an elitist talking here, but if the pond is big enough, you can see the sides of the fish. Obviously, it's not the same angle you would if you were looking at them through a pane of glass, But, if the fish is over on the other side of the pond and you're on your end, you can see the whole fish. You're not just looking at them from the top. So, like with mine, my pond is just the right size where I can see the whole fish. Again, it's a different angle than you would from an aquarium, but it's enough of an angle to be satisfied to be able to see all of them. But what about the downsides to ponds? Um, this is the perfect time of year to talk about the struggle that I just went through, which every pond owner will go through, and every aquarium keeper will go through, is those early algae blooms that I would argue are way worse in ponds than they are in aquariums. You're the scientist. Maybe you can explain that to me. I know why it is, but you haven't been talking enough in this episode, and I don't want people to yell at me in the comment section that you're not saying enough. Explain the science behind why a pond would get so much more infested with algae than an aquarium does.
So, and that was a problem that we had too, even in our small 50-gallon pond. Well, one, a lot of times you're putting this pond in direct sunlight. And so algae needs three things. It needs space, it needs food, and it needs sunlight, right? So when you've got your koi in there, or you've got a relatively heavily stocked pond, and a lot of people will stock a pond even more heavily than a natural body of water would be stocked. And so you've got a lot of extra food in there for your algae, and then you add in all of this sunlight. Next thing you know, you get a ton of green hair algae. That is usually like the number one thing that shows up in these ponds, green hair algae. We had a lot of it in our 50-gallon. Now, if you're just breeding fish, like we were doing, that was a primary reason why we had the pond. I actually didn't mind the algae in there because it holds, especially outside. Now you've got all kinds of organisms in that algae. Fish are going crazy. You're probably going to get a better yield. If it's something you want to look at, well, one, the algae looks horrible. It reduces water flow, which is reducing the amount of oxygen your fish can access at the surface, and stuff smells. Right. So sometimes that algae will stink. I mean, for those of you who had green hair algae, pull it out of your tank. Like, oh my gosh, this is just disgusting. So you have that issue. So it really is a matter of your pond's getting a lot of light, a lot of nutrients in there. There are ways to get around that. The goldfish, the koi will eat the stuff. Right. So that's a nice thing. If it's green hair algae, we had Florida flagfish in our little pond at one point. They were eating it, depending on the size. That may or may not make sense. But what's really interesting about the algae, and a problem that people will have in ponds that they don't necessarily have in fish tanks, and they're not necessarily prepared for it. In a normal situation, what's happening is when there is light and you've got a photosynthetic organism, whether it's algae or plants, when there is light, they're producing oxygen and using CO2, which is great. You want that to happen. But as soon as the lights go out, the algae, the plants, they switch and they start consuming oxygen and releasing CO2 into the water. And a lot of people have problems with ponds if they have a lot of excessive algae. That's not a good thing, because at night, all that algae is doing the same thing that your fish are doing, consuming a lot of oxygen, releasing a lot of CO2. Depending on your water parameters, that CO2 might actually produce carbonic acid and start lowering the pH. And so you can get this swing in pH where the pH goes up during the day as the carbon dioxide is being consumed by the plant or algae is releasing oxygen. And then at night, when it switches and starts producing a lot more CO2, the pH starts to go down and you wind up with these wild fluctuations, and that can actually lead to excessive fish death and all kinds of stress. So if you're finding that you're having problems keeping fish alive in your pond, or they're not acting right, especially in the morning, if they're piping a lot at the surface, you're like, I don't know what's going on. Well, one, you're going to want to increase the surface agitation and the water flow. Maybe you've got that little rock feature that helps tremendously. Additional air stones, something to get that water flow moving, which, by the way, a lot of types of algae don't really like that anyway. So if you've got problems with algae, you've got problems with duckweed type stuff, you get that surface moving and a lot of that is reduced. But you definitely should keep an eye on, if you're testing your water parameters in your pond, test it in the middle of the day, but also test it like 4 or 5 o'clock in the morning and see what the pH is like there. Some people will even go so far as to test dissolved oxygen. That gets expensive, but you can certainly do it.
Yeah, and this is something that just like that that diatom algae outbreak in a new aquarium is going to happen. An algae outbreak in a pond is going to happen. And it happened to me recently. It's very, very common in new ponds. And I think it's something that happens relatively quickly, but for me it was delayed. And that's because my pond was built in the summer, but it was at the tail end of summer. And so the pond was built, we got the fish in, and then, within a month, it started to dramatically cool down. And so we weren't combating algae hardly at all throughout the rest of that summer and then throughout the whole winter, obviously. But then spring hit, and oh boy, it was like, oh no, what has happened here? And that was because everything was in place perfectly for it to just flourish, and it did. It wasn't hair algae. There was a little bit of that, but it wasn't like hair algae to the point where it was flowing in the current of the water. It was just kind of fuzzy on some of the rocks. My water feature that I have, which is it's called a stacked slate sphere. It's a globe basically that water comes out of the center and trickles down the sides all the way around, and it's a really, really neat feature. Thank you for that, Greg. That had a accumulation of algae built up on that, and I was just like, oh no, what do I do? I went after it exactly like a fish keeper would go after it. I immediately start thinking, okay, well, I've got to clean it all off, do a big water change. That's what we do. That's how you fix it. No, that's not what you want to do in a situation like I had. In a situation like ponds, or in ponds, you don't want to do that. It doesn't hurt anything to do that, but it's basically, it doesn't really do a whole lot for you, because I did that, and then a week later, it looked exactly the same. In fact, I got an email from a customer slash subscriber slash friend last night. I'm not going to say names, but he emailed me going through the exact same thing right now. And he was like, okay, here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to drain it out, and I'm going to, completely scrub everything down. And I was like, I'm so glad you sent this to me, because I'm telling you right now, if you do that, you're making a mistake. And I explained to him there's the whole imbalance there. You've got too much nutrients. You're getting a lot more sunlight now than you were a month ago. Everything is out of whack, and the algae is taking over. For me, the worst part was the pea soup water, not necessarily the green hair algae on the rocks. That was there, but it was basically, you look at the pond and it was green, and it's embarrassing. It's like, this is the feature of my property, and I'm embarrassed for people to pull up to the house, which nobody ever does unless they're delivering something. But still, I don't want people seeing that. I did what I said. I took it all apart, did a huge filter maintenance, and that didn't work. A week later, it was right back to where it was. So I called in reinforcements, and I said, hey, what am I doing wrong here? And it's basically two things that I needed. I needed bacteria, and I needed plants. Because we have a lot of plants. Lisa has done an amazing job of scaping around the pond, but nothing in the water. We didn't have any plants in the water that were helping to absorb some of that. So, of course, when I told Lisa, hey, he told me I need plants, she started immediately foaming at the mouth, like, oh, we have to go buy plants. And it was a beautiful thing for her. So she went out and bought a whole bunch of floating plants and lilies to put in there. We put them in there. I'm certainly doing a sales pitch for Aquascape Inc. because I think it's an amazing company. I bought the concentrated beneficial bacteria from them, made specifically for ponds. Not an expensive product at all, and it's the easiest thing in the world. Comes with a little measuring cup. You put that amount in there as often as the directions say. Follow the directions, folks. I did that along with a thorough filter cleaning. My pond has the skimmer with filter sponges in there, and then it has the biofalls, which also has the sponges and the biomedia in there. Why am I drawing a blank? The balls.
I just call them bio balls.
There you go. And that's,
Yeah.
I don't know why that's not sounding right to me at the moment, but it's got those in there. And that's the start of the waterfall. So I did a deep cleaning of both of those, and then added the bacteria and added plants, and 2 weeks later, it's right back to normal. So I combated nature with nature, and there's something beautiful about that. I mean, with an aquarium, you do your water changes, you take your sponge, you wipe off the glass, you clean off the decorations, and the algae's gone. And then when it starts to come back, you wipe it down again, and you just control the imbalance, and then everything balances out. With a pond, it's beautiful to just watch it kind of resolve itself. That was, it took, the whole thing for me was about a 3 week process from where I started, wasted the first week by doing everything wrong. And then the second 2 weeks, it was every day. It was incrementally getting better and better to where now I sent my buddy last night the before and after photos. And he was like, whoa, obviously whatever you're saying works. And it worked beautifully in my situation. And that's something that every pond owner, whether you're getting a big expensive pond with all the fancy equipment, my pond has the, algae fighting equipment and stuff like that in it and all the things, but it's still going to happen. You're going to have that happen, and knowing how to handle that is, I mean, it saved me. I was going to go crazy if I didn't get the right information from the right person. And it's difficult to find that information online, because you type in algae in a pond, it's about as bad as typing in algae in an aquarium on YouTube. I mean, the results that you get are just overwhelming. But it's a pretty simple thing to resolve. That's the only struggle I've had in my pond, except for losing that one koi. And that was tough. It was one of those scenarios where the fish was perfectly fine one day. The next day he looked a little bloated, and then day 2, gone. And I was like, what happened to that fish? It's like he just blew up. It was heartbreaking. I'm sorry, Ed. We lost him. But and it had, I hate to be this guy and say this way, but it couldn't have been one of the little goldfish. It had to be one of the 4 actual koi that I have. I know that sounds horrible. Every fish is important, but of course it had to be one of the koi. But I want to talk now about something happier. I want to talk about that pond that we alluded to in the beginning. You've been there possibly more than I have. I've only been there once. But I think we both agree on what is the most magnificent pond we've ever seen, because we've both been there and we've both seen it.
Absolutely. And that's the one at Aquascape Inc. in St. Charles, Illinois, which is not far from me. It's a mass. I don't know how many gallons that pond. I don't even know if you at this point measure that in gallons.
I don't know.
It's huge. I don't know. Is it 200 feet across by 100 feet? I'm not sure. It's got a diving thing and multiple waterfalls and water features and huge fish, and it's absolutely insane. Yeah, I mean, it's something that you can easily swim in. It's almost bordering not on a pond, but like a mini lake / really large pond.
Yeah, and I couldn't wait to see that thing, because I had actually watched the videos on YouTube. They're out there. It is absolutely riveting to watch. The whole process of them building that pond is on YouTube. Aquascape Inc. is a very, very large company. Possibly the biggest pond company in the country. I don't know, but having been there and seen their 256,000 square foot warehouse and the facility that they have, I if they're not the biggest, I'd like to see the biggest. Good grief! But I watched all of that. I don't know if you ever saw it, Jason, but Greg used to have a television show. It was a very, very short-lived show called Pawn Stars. I watched that. I was a big fan of that before I even knew who Greg Wittstock was. So to be there in person, it was not a letdown. So many times you see these things on TV or on internet and you go to them, it's like, oh, that's a lot smaller than I expected. Not this. This was even more. They can't capture this pond, or like you said, lake. They can't capture it on video, and to get the real, like, vastness of it. I mean, it's the most unbelievable thing I've ever seen. I've never asked Greg. I'm sure he would tell us, but I've never asked him what kind of an investment that was. Worth every penny for them for what they do. I mean, it is the crown jewel of their business. It makes a lot of sense to do that. I would have to guess this thing's in the millions. What do I know? I'm just guessing, but it had to be in the millions. It's just absolutely unreal. It would make the late Hugh Hefner jealous, like, because it rivals what he had in his backyard. I mean, there's quite literal caves that you can crawl through, and there's a grotto there with waterfalls that cover it, and I've never seen anything like it. Not in an amusement park, not anywhere. That is the mecca of ponds, as far as I'm concerned, and there's very few places like that I would actually look forward to going to again. But I really want to go back there just to see that, because it was one of the most fascinating things I've ever seen. I highly encourage anybody, if you're thinking about a pond, look that up. You can find yourself watching the videos of the construction of that pond, like I did. It is fascinating to watch that. And, you know, if you enjoy looking at things that you will probably never have in your lifetime, like I will never have anything like that. But I do have some future plans that, involve more ponds that it's so weird. We're going to do an episode here. We're recording it today about can you ever have too many aquariums? When does it become too many? It's very similar with ponds. I mean, and I never thought it would be that way. I thought I would get a pond and it would be like, okay, that's amazing. I've wanted this my whole life. Never been able to do it. Now I finally got it. What a dream come true. But I immediately started thinking about, okay, where am I going to put the next one? How am I going to build the next one? How am I going to do it? I've had conversations with Tanner Serpa about coming here and building a pond. I've got the bug for sure. And I've got 5 acres. So there's places I could do it, even if I wanted to build something smaller. But I want to do one, and I want to do a DIY, and I'm really looking forward to it. Probably, I don't know if you've ever seen it, Jason, but Tanner did one at his previous home that he lived at. That was a square with a DIY. Everything was DIY. But it was really, really nice looking. And I've thought about doing something like that, mainly because I set up the pond, the big pond, to be a koi pond. Right. But that pond is full of fish now, because when we went to do that rescue, there was 25, goldfish in there, ranging anywhere from 3 inches up to 7 or 8 inches in size. Well, I wasn't going to leave them there to die. We got them all out. We brought them all home, and we put them in there. And so my pond is full now. I mean, I want to add some more koi in there, but I really shouldn't, given the stocking that's in there now. And I'm not going to just throw those goldfish away. They're a part of this whole thing now. So what I've thought about doing is building a DIY pond that would be like a 16 feet by 8 feet or something square, and use a couple of those CJ filter pump waterfall deals, and maybe a pond canister filter in there, and have that be where I put the goldfish, and then make room for my koi, and then or more koi, excuse me. I can totally see, you probably haven't done this because you're not as big a fan of ponds as I am. The koi bug is something. It's something out of control. The rabbit holes that you can fall down of watching video after video of people. Our friend George Mavrakis from Coralfish 12G has traveled the world looking at koi and buying koi for his ponds at home. It's There's so much out there. It is so fascinating. And there's so many koi out there that cost more than my house.
Yep.
And I
Yeah,
can't
there's a
imagine.
lot.
I
Now,
can't
see,
imagine
and to
spending that
me,
much.
you've got these awesome fish, and all I'm thinking is, give me a 2 or 3 thousand gallon aquarium so I can fully appreciate them from all angles. Like one where you could walk up and you could see them from the top, but then also you've got a big, massive glass viewing panel. That would be so cool. Or like build it in the side of a hill, right? So it's like a pond that's kind of half in the earth and half not. We've got a glass viewing pane. That would be so cool.
I talked with Brett Raymer because there's a video on YouTube of him doing something similar to that. I don't think it was when he was still doing the show, but I know it was at an older house of his in Las Vegas where he built a pond in the backyard that's in the ground, but also it was out of the ground and had a large viewing window on it, like you're talking about, and that was really really cool. It also had a TV up above it, which is outrageous. I couldn't do that here. Rains almost every day here, uh, but yeah, I don't know how he got away with that. But he doesn't live at that house anymore, so I don't even know what happened with that pond. But that's similar to what you're talking about. And then George, Coralfish 12G, did one like that in his basement. The Aquascape guys went over there and helped him with it. It has two viewing windows. It's kind of like a pond meets Joey's 2,000 gallon that he has. Like, it's a pond, but it's also an aquarium,
Yeah.
if that makes sense. Really, really cool. He built that in his parents' basement, which is
Nice.
neat. But George got the koi bug big. Like I said, he's been to Dubai, Japan. He's been all over the world in the quest for koi. And so it's absolutely fascinating to watch. And to me, I think the biggest thing that having a pond did, and I would dare anybody to argue with this, it introduced me to a whole new world of fish keeping. It's kind of like starting your first saltwater aquarium. To me, that opened up this whole new world. And I knew, okay, there's different fish, there's different equipment, there's different things. But I just never knew how like wide open it is. Like, oh, this is like starting all over again. And for me, ponds are all about koi and goldfish. That's just how it is. Sure, I love the tubs with the rice fish and so, but to me, it's about the koi. Um, and I mean, koi are not just koi. Koi are not just fancy goldfish. There's a whole world out there that is koi fish, and it's spectacular. And you won't find anything that will reinvigorate this hobby for you. I've always said, if the hobby starts to get a little stale for you, try something new. You do that. If it's koi, it will definitely do that to you. Koi are a whole new world, and I love it. And I encourage anybody to try a pond. Do a DIY one. Do whatever it is. When you open this door, it's a whole new world, and it's magnificent, and I love it.
Yeah, I think you've kind of like I said at the beginning of this podcast, we have toyed with the idea since the 50 gallon is not outside. I've got space right to my left, and I'm like, I'm not going to put a tank there. We're done. The gallery is done, but I could put the pond there and just have a nice little feature. And I think I may have to do that.
It's a lot of
Indoor
fun.
pond. Yep.
We've got one of those too. It's a Tractor Supply Rubbermaid stock tank that Lisa breeds ram's horn snails in, and she has about 1,000 guppies in there. It is a lot of fun. It's cool. It's a different way of doing this hobby, and you can do it on the cheap. It's fun.
Yep.
Her stock tank that she has in the fish house with the guppies and snails in it, all she has in it is an air stone. That's it. Nothing
Nice.
else. And it's the fish breed like crazy, and the snails. I mean, good luck trying to stop ram's horn snails from breeding, though. They're
Right.
gonna do it regardless. But yeah, it's a lot of fun. I don't know really what else to say about it. Ponds are amazing. They're also very expensive, but having my dream realized thanks to the good folks at Easton Outdoors and Aquascape Inc. I'm looking at it as we speak. I'm looking out my window and I'm seeing the waterfall. It's an amazing thing. Anybody that loves fish would love to have something like this. So I don't really know what else to say about it.
No, go out and try it. Again, like you said, if it's something where, you've done the fish tank thing, you're like, you want to try something different. Again, you can do an indoor pond too, right? So you can do small indoor ponds. I've got friends who have done that. It's awesome if you don't have the space outside, or maybe you're in a position like I can where we got away with the 50-gallon. Anything larger, we probably would have gotten some letters from the homeowners association. But that one, it was just something where it's kind of by our bushes right next to our patio. Nobody ever said anything. We just did it, and it was fun. And now I'm going to bring that bad boy inside. Who knows? Maybe in a couple weeks you'll see a video. I set up the pond again inside.
There you go. And for those that are in the climate like Jason's, or you're in the north and you're worried about it, what a lot of people do is they get those stock tanks. They use those for the winter in their basements or in their garage, and then put them out in the ponds in the spring, summer, and fall. Even goldfish, because certain places, if you live in Montana or Michigan, maybe Illinois, the entire pond would become one big block of ice. You don't want that. Bring those fish in the wintertime. You can do it, and it is a lot of fun. So I encourage anybody to try it. As the great Ferris Bueller said, if you have the means. I don't remember the quote. Come on, from Ferris Bueller's Day Off.
Oh, yeah. If you have the means,
I definitely recommend picking one up. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. If you have, yeah.
If you have
the Ferrari,
means, I recommend picking one up. It's so. Oh, whatever. Ferris Bueller's Day Off, one of the best movies ever. I'm failing on the movie quotes, but if you have the ability, whether it's just a stock tank or a trash can, I don't care what it is, it's a different world and you will love it. So on that note, thank you all so much for hanging out with us. The summer doldrums have definitely hit this hobby, but for those that are here, we definitely appreciate that, especially this time of year when things tend to slow down. We're very appreciative of people that are coming in and checking out the podcast. For those of you that are new, welcome to you too. We love having everybody hang out with us, and we will come back next week with another amazing topic. I'm looking forward to this one, so buckle up. That one's going to be a lot of fun, and we'll see you next week.